Hi, my name is Penelope Feliciano, and I am a high school teacher out of Leander, Texas. This is going to be my now 12th year teaching. I have, for a long time, wanted to make a difference. So I am super excited that Ed Talk is giving me this opportunity to share with other educators and coaches with uh, outside of the box thinking when it comes to something that is very ingrained in our educational system, which is grades, right? So anything that you want to follow, please make sure to check out #EdTalks and share with the rest of the learning community that is engaged in these kinds of conversations. Okay, so today I am going to take the time to talk about how I have started to move away from grading. Last year was my first year that I officially um, stopped offering grades to students as a way to show mastery. I have created a presentation that will hopefully take us through the different points and approaches that I went through to get to this. So if you allow me, I am going to share my screen and I am going to take you one slide at a time. Let's see if I can present in that way. You can see one slide at a time. All right, so here we go. Learning without grades, what this looks like for me. So first of all, I'd like to start with making some reference to what happens when grades are what is driving our education, right? We have definitely a sense of competition that is always in the background with the students. And unfortunately, this brings with it a sort of I'm superior or the opposite, I'm inferior mentality. It's not always ill-intended, but it's always in the background. And you start to see that division happening within the classroom, which is very sad to see. Then you also have the mental translation for these students where good grades equals good student and bad grades equals bad student. It is very difficult to give a grade, say, of a D or an F to a student and expect that they're going to feel valued and good, right? Then you have the scenario where, especially I've seen it in our high school level, where it's not that cool to keep trying on an assessment, right? To keep coming back and retake or go to tutorials to get extra help to be able to retake. A lot of our students who feel that they are not getting the whatever subject or lesson is being talked about, they end up pausing at the failure feeling rather than pushing through it. And the failure feeling ultimately brings you to a feeling of fear of not wanting to try and not wanting to look for the ways to further your learning. We also have something that especially I teach IB, which is International Baccalaureate Program, and most of these students are very gifted. And for me, it is an everyday thing that I see students care so much more about their GPA and the points they are accumulating over the learning that they're acquiring. I constantly have to remind my students what matters, what truly matters for you, what knowledge are you gaining, and try to move them away from, where are you at today? What point are you at today? Are you first place? Are you second? Are you third? It's a pretty sad competition to constantly see. Then we are looking at the simple fact that grades have become a bargaining tool for teachers. Maybe not becoming full aware of it or being conscious of it, right? But in a subconscious way, grades become, you do this for me this way by this date, follow my guide, my way of doing it, and you get this, right? Unfortunately, that decision power is on the side of the teacher heavily. So it becomes a power struggle there, which leads us to it becoming somewhat of a compliance over engagement, right? A student has to learn the game of school. They have 8 classes for high schoolers. For our high schoolers, they have 8 classes. They have to kind of learn what teacher A wants and how teacher A wants it, and then what teacher B wants and how teacher B wants it, and teacher C, and so on, right? They have to learn the way to become successful in each one of those classes, which at that point, if you think about it, how much energy is left to fully become engaged and just love learning in each one of these classes. Then, of course, you have the problem where it becomes a game of who can memorize best what, right? With quizzes and tests, especially multiple choice quizzes and tests that don't give the student the opportunity to apply knowledge, but more regurgitate what they have been able to memorize. How sad is it? And then on top of that, try asking them that same information, 2 weeks later, shoot, 5 days later, and the majority of them will not be able to successfully explain or teach the information that will quickly leave their minds if it is not truly taught and just memorized. And finally, that takes us to the misrepresentation that a letter grade gives to a student's depth of learning. A cycle, for example, in our high school, a grading cycle goes for about 6 weeks, give or take. And that is a long time to depict what a student learned and how a student learned. But at the end of the cycle, we are expected to give one letter to fully explore and explain the depth of learning of each individual student. How unfair is that? You can have a gifted student who had a couple of bad weeks perhaps at home and stop trying, get a C, and you can have a struggling student who tried their hardest and showed great improvement and did everything that was expected of him or her, and they can both have a C. It is a real big limitation in that sense. It brings me to this toy that we used to have when we were little, right? Where you had to try to fit the shapes into these pre-existing holes, and how frustrating it was to try and fit a shape into a hole where it was not the right fitting, right? How can we possibly try to put all of our students into 4 or 5 different letter grades? Um, there is no way that that can be a representation of a student's learning. It's just too many limitations. Okay, so that takes me, say you are gung-ho, right? And you really do want to go into the world of moving away from grades. When I got started, I experienced a lot of pushback, which is something that as a teacher, you're going to have to embrace. Um, it is going out of the traditional, right? And that always first meets pushback and insecurity and fear. These are some of the ones that surprisingly I got from fellow teachers as I was trying to spread what I was learning. These are a few of the ones that I heard constantly. Um, this is only an issue for struggling students. That right away I can tell you is not true. I only teach gifted and talented. I only teach IB, and grades definitely influence them as well. It is not just for struggling students. Labeling is going to affect anyone involved. It even affects the teachers who are giving the grades. Um, but that's a different talk. um, that's how we divide and conquer in society, right? I had a lot of teachers tell me, well, you know, it's a system that goes back historically. We can't, not everybody can reach the top. And to that, I just have to say that A, maybe that is the problem with our society. And B, it is not our jobs as teachers to build the limitations for these students. It is our job only to help them cultivate a love for learning and the ability to keep on learning with whatever scenario they might encounter later on in life, right? Life, their own choices, um, that will depict where they end up in life. But us as teachers, we cannot set those boundaries so early on. The next one, it is what it is. That's what colleges look at. Um, not every system that is in place is a perfect system. And not just because we've done something for years does it mean it's the right way to go, right? So fear not to think outside the box and try a different way. You might have great results. Who has that kind of time? Going away from grades pushes you to narrative feedback and individual narrative feedback. So it's a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of work. But if we expect a lot of work from our students for each one of their classes, then the least we can do is give that same type of effort back. We cannot use the excuse that it takes too much time. Students can't self-assess. In the no grades process, students are going to be doing a lot of self-assessing and peer assessing. And I heard a lot from the teachers where, you know, students can't do that. They will not be able to do that. My challenge is that you let them try. They will not be perfect. They will have to take steps back and forward often, but the growth that they will gain will be worth every step of the struggle. And what a better example to teach students that it's okay to take risks than actually letting them take that control and empowering them to not fear the risk of perhaps failure. it doesn't matter. You can always make it better again and again. So to that, I just say, try it. It will have successful stories at the end. And then finally, one that I do empathize with, teachers always struggle with, how can I prove learning, right? Ultimately, we are in systems that still need these letter grades, and you a lot of times can't move away from that. And administrators are going to require, not only want, but they're going to require that you prove the learning that is going on. You are going to digitize your data. You are going to uh, fill out Google Forms of the feedback that is coming from students. You are going to record and video the lessons and the conferences, the one-on-one conferences that will be going on. Believe me, coming from someone who tried it last year, you will have tons of data to show student improvement through the process from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. You will have the data to show. And ultimately, just so you know, at the end, students will come up with a grade. They between you and the student, you will formulate a grade that is fair for the learning that they have had. All right, so how do you go into this grading process? A book that I highly recommend is Hacking Assessment by Star Sackstein. It is part of a book series that is called Hack Hack Learning series. It is, I believe, like 8 or 10 books that take you into the whole process of moving away from um, your typical learning styles in the classroom. Um, that is where I am. I have gotten the majority of my strategies and approaches to uh, moving away from grades. Also, of course, you will have to do tons of research. I have a lot of research that I continue to do on a daily basis to improve. But this book series is phenomenal. Um, so these are some of the things that I take away after completing this book study last year. How do you do it? How do you begin to go away from grades? Um, First, you have to talk about it. You want to talk with all of the stakeholders, right? Your administrators, you're going to have the conversation of proving why it's so essential to move away from this labeling system. Um, we live in the 21st century. These students are so much more evolved than we care to even consider from time to time. And we cannot have them in a learning style or system that dates back to hundreds of years ago, right? Um, so talk about it. Talk about it with your administrators. Talk about it with other teachers. As you start to have these success stories, share them. Maybe create a blog, share them with your other fellow teachers. There is a Facebook group that is, for teachers who are throwing out grades. There is so much talk already happening. Become a part of the conversation. Parents, at the beginning of the year, created a letter that was my come to the light side kind of a letter, right? Where I was asking for the opportunity to take students on a different journey, on a different path. I was very transparent. Told them that it was going to be a learning curve as much for them as it was for me. Told them that I was going to create a YouTube channel where they could follow our journey. Um, it is an opening to your classroom for the parents to see everything that you are trying to do for their students. And then, of course, the communication with the students. Sadly but truly, they are the ones that have the hardest time understanding how you plan on moving away from grades. They just don't get how you are going to be able to assess their learning without having grades. So it is a year long conversation. You will constantly have to be reminding them of what we're doing and what is being done day by day through the strategies that you're going to implement. Um, uh, the best way that I found to do that, and again, this comes from the hacking assessment book, um, is that I normalized something that has a lot of mystery, right? For the students, I made real life examples like riding a bike or swimming. How did you learn to do that if you were not graded, right? You tried and you fell and you tried again and you learned something new, and maybe you learned to step off the sidewalk as an easier way to get started, or maybe you started with training wheels and then one training wheel came off and then the other came off. And as you try to make the process seem like a more normal way of learning for these students, um, little by little they start to get, okay, this is how we all should be learning, right? um, and I have found myself that I go back to examples throughout the year, just to remind them of, remember, this is what we're doing, right? Once you get started, and in the next slide, I will go into how I actually do it with project-based learning. But once you get started, you have to continue the communication. It is a continuous and evolving communication. The questions will come from teachers, from parents. It's an ongoing communication. Um, you have to really learn to review and clarify the standards that you're wanting the students to um, have success with. It is something that you're going to unpack with the students. Um, I think that this takes the biggest amount of time. With myself and my students, I took a really good amount of time to help them completely be clear of what I needed them to learn. That was a very important conversation. And then you share and you continuously perfect feedback models, right? You're going to have a lot of different feedback models like checklists and rubrics and open reflective dialogue through Google Forms and different types of reflective models that will be evolving as the year goes on. And at every time where you see it fit, you will have to stop and take the time to look at what feedback models are being effective, which students are finding easier to work with, which students are struggling to work with, etc. You are going to be the biggest model to show the importance of reflecting, right? You are wanting to show students how to look back at their process of learning and reflect on every step of the way. And it's going to be verbal reflection, it's going to be written reflection, it's going to be peer reflection. That is also going to be a gem that is going to, by the end of the year, the students will see what this reflective skill has done for them. And then one of the most important things is you're going to work on changing mindset by changing vocabulary, right? Instead of saying, grade, you're going to say assess. Instead of saying, or the student saying, what grade did I get? They're going to be saying, what did I learn, right? Instead of saying this is wrong, you're going to be saying look for a different way, show me a different way, right? um, Instead of I don't know or I don't get it, perhaps you're going to train them to say I'm still searching for the way, right? It's going to be a vocabulary change that is going to change the mindset for both you and the students as you move along. Okay, so finishing off, um, I approach this again as a suggestion that came from the same book through project-based learning. I kind of work backwards, right? In our school, we have a 6-week cycle period. So I started at the end. I looked at what do my students need to know, right? You determine the standards. What do I need them to know by the end? Then you open the conversation with the students and you say, okay, this is the list of things we need to know. Can we, as a class, decide what is most important, what is not so important, what can we combine, etc. You have that kind of conversation that will lead you to a together understanding of what is going to be learned, right? Then you create an assessment. And again, this was also a conversation. You have to be willing to let the students take choice in how they want to show mastery. So I opened it up to the students. This is what we have to learn. Can you guys give me any ideas of a big project that can include all of these learning skills, right? And I know, again, it's hard to believe that they'll stand up to the challenge, and not all of them will, but you will have an ending product, right? For me, we came up with a project where the students were going to be given an island by the United Nations, an island the size of the big island of Hawaii. And they had to come up, our unit was social organization, okay? And they had to come up with the laws, they had to come up with a health system, they had to come up with education system, they had to come up with deciding who came onto the island, they had to come up with deciding transportation, what kind of infrastructure was going to be needed, what kind of buildings they were going to have, what kind of care there was going to be for senior citizens, for daycare, there was so much involved. And again, all of this was coming from the students. We were able to build this cycle-long project that entailed group work, that entailed reflection, that entailed research, writing, reading, speaking. It had all of our standards within this one project. Then what you do is you set, I'm on the third block here, you set learning checks, right? You decide as a teacher, now comes in your skill as an educator, and you set learning checks. You decide where you're going to be calling them in to assess their learning so far. And then you take the time to create the tools that is going to help you figure out where their learning is. For me, it was Google Forms. It was polls. I took polls through Google as well. I did different things that helped me get a temperature gauge of how they were learning along the way. And for me, it is language learning, right? So that is what my focus was. As you make these learning checks, you again clarify, you uh, individualize the feedback. You also have room for peer feedback, talking to different groups to better understand different mindsets, right? Because every group was going to approach the project a different way, so they also learn from each other a lot. Through this process, I am digitizing my data. I am in Google Docs or in Google spreadsheets. I am putting the different pieces of feedback that I am getting from the students. I am monitoring their language use and recording the strategies that they are taking to research, or the strategies that they are taking to proofread, or whatever is happening at any given time. I am recording. I am recording one way or another so that I can have data to later look at. You set expectations, and you give room for students to show learning in different ways. And then you do the hardest thing. You let go. You let them take over the learning process, knowing that through the process, there's going to be learning checks, but no grades. You will be amazed at the freedom that is felt in the room to take risks and to learn from one another, and to express when they're stuck. If there is no grade hanging over their head, it is amazing what these students will demonstrate, all that they have learned. And then, of course, at the end, you have your one-on-one conference where you and the student decide what grade this process is going to gain. And of course, the students and I had previously talked about this. We were all knowing that eventually we were going to translate it into a grade, but that was known, it was something that had to be done because of the school system we're in, right? But the shift went tremendously through the process, from that final shift that was going to happen to actually enjoying and learning from every step of the process of the project. It was truly amazing to see. I highly suggest again, the book, which is Hacking Assessment by Star Sackstein. She's a great author, very, very easy to read. And you can also let me know if, hashtag EdTalk, and I will follow questions that we can build from each other as well. I hope that helps, and I thank you all for your time and allowing me to spread what I have become truly passionate about. Thanks a lot.